Hello Resistance members and test subjects, and welcome to another episode of Crowbars and Portal Guns. Before we start our episode today, I'd like to say that after our 10th episode in this first season, we're going to have a special mid-season spectacular full of fun, surprises, and a robotic guest who I will be answering your questions with. So if you have any questions about the Portal or Half-Life series or this podcast in general, please submit them in the comments on YouTube. Thank you. Today, we will be talking about the events that take place after Half-Life 2 Episode 2, something that fans have been waiting for years to get, but at this point, probably won't be made into a game because Valve, come on. Anyway, in 2017, on August 25th, Half-Life writer Mark Laidlaw released a little story titled Half-Life Epistle 3. Half-Life Epistle 3 is basically Half-Life 2 Episode 3, taking place right after the death of Eli Vance, as Gordon Freeman and Alex Vance head off to the Arctic to find the Borealis. One thing today I will be reading that story. It is in the form of a letter, probably aimed at the players reading it. Now, before we start, I would like to say that Valve has confirmed that this isn't the canon story, but it's funny because Valve had once said canonicity is up to the player, so I believe that this would happen next, well, with a few tweaks, of course. On the day of its release, Mark Laidlaw also tweeted, "My website's down for now. I guess fanfic is popular, even a gender-swapped snapshot of a dream I had many years ago." The original Epistle 3 was based off a dream Mark Laidlaw had. It basically is Episode 3, but it gender swaps all the characters. Gordon Freeman is called Gertie Fremont, Alex Vance is called Alex Vaunt, Dr. Eli Vance is Dr. Ellie Vaunt, and etc. I, for your convenience, have switched all the names to the ones that we know in the canon story, to make it easier for you. I will be reading that letter now. I hope this letter finds you well. I can hear your complaint already. Gordon Freeman, we have not heard from you in ages. Well, if you care to hear excuses, I have plenty. The greatest of them being I've been in other dimensions and whatnot, unable to reach you by the usual means. This was the case until about 18 months ago, when I experienced a critical change in my circumstances and was redeposited on these shores. In my time since, I have been able to think occasionally about how best to describe the intervening years, my years of silence. I do first apologize for the wait, and that done, hasten to finally explain events following those described in my previous letter, referred to herewith as Episode 2. To begin with, you may recall from the closing paragraphs of my previous missive, the death of Eli Vance shook us all. The research and resistance team was traumatized, unable to be sure how much of our plan might be compromised, and whether it made any sense to go on at all as we had intended. And yet, once Eli had been buried, we found the strength and courage to regroup. It was the strong belief of his brave daughter, the feisty Eli Vance, that we should continue on as her father had wished. We had the Arctic coordinates, transmitted by Eli's longtime assistant, Dr. Judith Mossman, and we believed to mark the location of the lost luxury liner, the Borealis. Eli had felt strongly that the Borealis should be destroyed rather than allow it to fall into the hands of the Combine. Others on our team disagreed, believing that the Borealis might hold the secret to the revolution's success. Either way, the arguments were moot until we found the vessel. Therefore, immediately after the service for Dr. Vance, Alex and I boarded a seaplane and set off for the Arctic. A much larger support team, mainly militia, was to follow by separate transport. It is still unclear to me what exactly brought down our little aircraft. The following hours spent traversing the frigid wastes in the blizzard were also a jumbled blur, ill-remembered and poorly defined. The next thing I clearly recall is our final approach to the coordinates Dr. Mossman had provided, and where we expected to find the Borealis. What we found instead was a complex fortified installation showing all the hallmarks of sinister Combine technology. It surrounded a large open field of ice. Of the Borealis itself there was no sign, or not first. But as we stealthily infiltrated the Combine installation, we noticed a reoccurrent, strangely coherent auroral effect, as of a vast hologram fading in and out of view. The bizarre phenomenon initially seemed an effect caused by an immense Combine lensing system. Alex and I soon realized that what we were actually seeing was the luxury liner Borealis itself, phasing in and out of existence at the focus of the Combine devices. The aliens had erected their compound to study and seize the ship whenever it materialized. What Dr. Mossman had provided were not coordinates for where the boat was located, but where it was predicted to arrive next. The liner was oscillating in and out of our reality, and pulses were gradually steadying, but there was no guarantee it would settle into place for long or at all. We determined that we must put ourselves into position to board it at the instant it became completely physical. At this point we were briefly detained, not captured by the Combine as we feared at first, but by minions of our former nemesis, the conniving and duplicitous Dr. Wallace Breen. Dr. Breen was not as we had last seen him, which is to say, he was not dead. At some point the Combine had saved out an earlier version of his consciousness, and upon his physical demise, they had imprinted the backup personality into a biological blank, resembling an enormous slug, the common appearance for a Combine advisor. The Breen grub, despite occupying a position of relative power in the Combine hierarchy, seemed nervous and frightened of me in particular. Wallace did not know how his previous incarnation, the original Dr. Breen, had died. He only knew that I was responsible. Therefore, the slug treated us with great caution. Still, he soon confessed, never able to keep quiet for long, that he was himself a prisoner of the Combine. He took no pleasure from his current grotesque existence, and pleaded with us to end his life. Alex believed that quick death was more than Wallace Breen deserved, but for my part, I felt some pity in comparison. Out of Alex's sight, I might have done something to hasten the slug's demise before we proceeded. Not far from where we had been detained by Dr. Breen, we found Dr. Judith Mossman being held in the Combine interrogation cell. Things were tense between Judith and Alex, as might be imagined. Alex blamed Judith for her father's death, news of which Judith was devastated to hear for the first time. Judith tried to convince Alex that she had been a double agent serving the Resistance all along, doing only what Eli had asked of her, even though she knew it meant she risked being seen by her peers, by all of us, as a traitor. I was convinced, Alex less so. But from the pragmatic point of view, we depended on Dr. Mossman, for along with the Borealis' coordinates, she possessed resonance keys, which would be necessary to bring the liner fully into our plane of existence. We skirmished with Combine soldiers, protecting our research posts. Then Dr. Mossman attuned the Borealis to precisely the frequencies needed to bring it into brief coherence. In the short time available to us, we scrambled aboard the ship with an unknown number of Combine agents close behind. The ship cohered for only a short time, and then its oscillations resumed. It was too late for our own military support, which arrived and joined the Combine forces in battle just as we rebounded between universes, once again unmoored. What happened next is even harder to explain. Dr. Mossman, Alex Vance, and myself sought control of the ship, its power source, its control room, its navigation center. The liner's history provided non-linear. years before, during the Combine invasion, various members of an earlier science team working in the hull of the dry docked liner situated at the After Science Laboratories in Upper Michigan had assembled what they called the bootstrap device. If it worked as intended, it would emit a large field around the ship. This field would then travel instantly to any chosen destination without having to cover the intervening space. There was no need for entry or exit portals or any other devices. It was entirely self-contained. Unfortunately, the device had never been tested, as the Combine pushed Earth into a 7-hour war, the aliens seeking control of our most important research facilities. The staff of the Borealis, which, with no other wish than to keep the ship out of Combine hands, acted in desperation. They switched on the field and flung the Borealis toward the most distant destination they could target, the Arctic. What they did not realize is that the bootstrap device traveled in time as well as space, nor was it limited to one time or one location. The Borealis and the moment of its activation were stretched across space and time between the 7-hour war and the present-day Arctic. It was pulled taut as an elastic band, vibrating, except for at certain points along its length one could find still points, like the harmonic spots along the vibrating guitar string. One of these harmonics was where we boarded, but the string ran forward and back in both time and space, and we were soon pulled in every direction ourselves. Time grew confused. Looking from the bridge, we could see the dry docks of After Science at the moment of teleportation, just as the Combine forces closed in from land, sea, and air. At the same time, we could see the Arctic wastelands, where our friends were fighting to make their way to the protein Borealis. And in addition, glimpses of our world, somewhere in the future perhaps, or maybe even in the past. Alex grew convinced we were seeing one of the Combine's central staging areas for invading other worlds, such as our own. We meanwhile fought a running battle throughout the ship, pursued by Combine forces. We struggled to understand our situation and to agree on our course of action. Could we alter the course of the Borealis? Should we run it aground in the Arctic, giving our peers a chance to study it? Should we destroy it with all hands aboard, our own included? It was impossible to hold a coherent thought, given the baffling and paradoxical time loops which passed through the ship like bubbles. I felt like I was going mad, that we all were, confronting myriad visions of ourselves in that ship was that half ghost ship, half nightmare funhouse. What it came down to at last was a choice. Dr. Mossman argued reasonably that we should save the Borealis and deliver it to the Resistance, that our intelligent peers might study and harness its power. But Alex reminded me I had sworn we would honor her father's demand that we destroy the ship. She hatched a plan to set the Borealis to self-destruct, while riding it into the heart of the Combine's world. Judith and Alex argued. Judith overpowered Alex and brought the Borealis area, preparing to shut off the bootstrap device and settle the ship on the ice. Then I heard a shot, and Judith fell. Alex had decided for all of us, or her weapon had. With Dr. Mossman dead, we were committed to the suicide plunge. Grimly, Alex and I armored the Borealis, creating a time-traveling missile, and steered it for the heart of the Combine's command center. At this point, as you will no doubt be unsurprised to hear, a certain sinister figure appeared in the form of that sneering trickster, the G-Man. For once, he appeared not to me, but to Alex Vance. Alex had not seen the cryptical schoolmarm since childhood, but she recognized him instantly. "Come along with me now. We've places to do and things to be," said G-Man. And Alex acquiesced. She followed the strange pale man out of the Borealis, out of our reality. For me, there was no convenient door held open, only a snicker and a sideways glance. I was left alone, riding the weaponized luxury liner into the heart of the Combine world. An immense light blazed. I caught a cosmic view of a brilliantly glimmering Dyson sphere. The vastness of the Combine power, the futility of our struggle blossomed briefly in my awareness. I saw everything. Mainly I saw how the Borealis was our most powerful weapon, would register as less than a fizzling matchhead as it blew itself apart, and what remained of me would be even less than that. Just then, as you have surely already foreseen, the Vorgons parted their own checkered curtains of reality, reached in, as they have on prior occasions, plucked me out and set me aside. I barely got to see the fireworks begin. And here we are. I spoke of my return to this shore. It has been a circuitous path to lands I once knew, and surprised to see how much the terrain had changed. Enough time had passed that few remember me, or what I was saying when last I spoke, or what precisely we hoped to accomplish. At this point, the resistance will have failed or succeeded, no thanks to me. Old friends have been silenced or fallen by the wayside. I no longer know or recognize most members of the research team, though I believe the spirit of resistance still persists. I expect you know better than I the appropriate course of action, and I leave you to it. Expect no further correspondence from me regarding these matters. This is my final episode. Yours in infinite finality, Gordon Freeman, Ph.D. And this was Half-Life 2, Epistle 3. Thank you all for listening. I'm so happy that I got the chance to share one of my favorite Half-Life stories with you, even though it's not completely canon or what 100% I wanted. I'd like to remind you all about my special mid-season spectacular happening after our 10th episode in this first season. We'll have special voice lines, a special co-host, and, once again, a robotic guest who will be personally answering the questions you send in. So make sure to answer the questions at the end of this episode, and to comment on YouTube. Send in your questions. I want to hear them. Plus, I also want to hear some future episode ideas. And don't forget to find us on Discord. Thank you all for joining me once again. Half-Life 2 Epistle 3 is a really interesting take on Half-Life 2 Episode 3. Mark Laidlaw had once tweeted a few changes to the story, like, one of the changes was he didn't really think that Alex Vance would shoot Judith. It's not really in her personality. He thinks that Alex, should push Judith off of the ship into a time loop bubble instead of actually killing her. I think this does suit Alex's personality more. It's definitely better than just shooting her, as she was Eli's friend, even though she was a traitor. This story was also originally supposed to have Barney Calhoun, the Blackmaster security guard turned resistance member, and Dog. Dog's changed name was actually going to be Cat in the original gender swap story. And Breen Grub. An interesting thing about Breen Grub is that a few years before Epistle 3 was released, I want to say it was 5, Mark Laidlaw created another Twitter account and called Breen Grub. It seems that it started out as him just adjusting to his new body, but seemed that he began giving the resistance information, but around the end of his days, something seemed to take him over, and he began asking the resistance for vital information, like the coordinates of their bases, as he was taken over by by the Combine. I'd like to thank you again for joining me today, Resistance members and test subjects, and I'd also like to remind you to keep gaming.